celebrating the power of possibility.
I'm here at Glasgow, and I believe anything is possible.
This is Anything is Possible. And this guy right here is proof that anything is possible. You cannot be stopped. This is my dear friend and colleague, Eric Glasgow. Thank you for being with us today on Anything is Possible.
Thank you so much for having me. It really is an honor. When I consider the folks, that have sat in this chair before me, I deal in life with like a partial imposter syndrome, all the time. And this is another one of those examples. It's such an honor to be here.
Well, it's been my pleasure and my joy to be a colleague of yours for many years. I hit it off when I first met you. I was stunned that you knew the complete Keith Sweat repertoire.
I don't look the part, do I?
We were on the air one day and Chris was playing some bumper music. He was playing Keith Sweat and you were singing it line for line.
Yeah, it was Keith Sweat Twisted is what it was. Yeah.
I said, wait a minute. Thank you for being here. How are you doing?
I'm doing good. Despite everything, I'm doing good.
Let's just start at the beginning of your journey. Where were you born?
I was born right outside of Nashville, Tennessee, small town called Goodlettsville.
I've been there.
Yeah, it's just north of Nashville. Was born in 1972, which puts me at 52 now, which I can't believe. I never thought way back when that I'd make it to my 50s, but here I am.
You have siblings?
I do. I've got one brother. We are really close. He was my first best friend, ever, and I still consider him that.
What was it like growing up there?
Growing up there, it was a small town. We were basically, middle class. My mom was a homemaker and a beautician, and kind of half and half, those roles. My dad was, growing up, he worked for, at the time, South Central Bell, back when there was such a thing, and then moved up to, I think, Siemens Alice ITE was where he was.
What did you think you were going to do? What were your interests?
The funny thing was, I remember being in school, and of course, I'm not representing a beard.
Man,
today,
you were my beard leader.
It got pretty. I'll show you a picture later. I mean, it was biblical up until this past Thursday. I actually shaved on Thursday. But I remember in school, they wanted us to draw our future self. And I drew a picture of me with a beard. I always thought I'd have a beard because that's what my dad had. My dad had a beard. So I drew a picture of me with a beard and showing the weather. It was like I had a feeling that I was going to be doing something either on TV or the radio. And that's the picture I drew of myself, back then. That's how, it just was always, kind of in the back of my head. Yeah.
Where'd that come from?
I don't know.
Was there somebody you saw on television or heard on the radio?
Growing up, I loved, television, so I think maybe I just had that association. I didn't have really, any kind of, inspiration, or anything. I loved growing up, waking up in the mornings, watching Ralph Emery.
He was
WSMV.
He was really good.
Yes. Outstanding.
His likability, and that's a thing in television, just coming across warm.
Yes.
Everybody loved and respected Ralph Emery. He was he was a giant in our field.
He really was. And I was fortunate to meet him several times throughout the years. Growing up, while in high school, one of my summer jobs was working at Opryland. And he did a show. It may be called Nashville Now or so. I can't remember what the show was. But he did a show where, he worked with country music stars and so forth. And I would see him in passing there in the park, him leaving that studio, going back to his area, we would cross paths, and I got to meet him a couple times. But that was the wake up every day. It's probably my first beard influence. Yeah.
Did he have a problem with you being a stalker? No.
Possibility powered by Covenant Health, Home Federal, and the Knoxville News Sentinel.
Now you can listen while you're on the go with Anything Is Possible, the podcast.
So grow up in Goodlettsville. What was next after you grow up and go to school?
Well,
went to high school there. Did you play sports?
Yeah, I played football. Little known fact, I was a high school dropout.
Did not know that.
I went to school up through my junior year, and this was probably my first come to Jesus meeting with an adult or anything. I was acting up in class one day. No. Can you believe it? It was what should have been my senior year. I was probably still considered a junior, but it should have been my senior year. And I was having like issues in school, running around and everything. I really didn't, never had any kind of trouble that involved the law or anything, but I was screwing up. I really was, and was in a class one day. And I'm not going to say the teacher's name, but I'm remembering very well. I was acting up in class, and I didn't realize it, but there was a classroom observer in the class that day that was more or less, I think, rating or grading the teacher. And he said, "Eric, why don't you go outside in the hallway and wait for me a second?" And I was just kind of like, ooh, I went out in the hallway. He joined me out in the hallway, pushed me up against the wall, grabbed my lapels or my collar, and said, "I've got an observer in there. You are majorly screwing me, right now. I could punch you right now, and no one would believe you." He said, because he said, "You are known, to be a troublemaker. I've got a Class A rating. They will not listen to you." He said, "So you can either come back in here or go to the office." And so at the time I was like, "I'll just go to the office, whatever."
Right.
And so I did. But that was my wake up moment. What he's saying is the truth. So it was like at that early age, I don't remember, how old I was at that time, probably 17. But I was like, I got to make some changes.
So you drop out.
I did.
What'd you do?
I talked to my dad about it. So he's like, "Well, what are you going to do in place?" And I said, "I'll take my GED and go to school." He's like, "Okay, let's see it." So I took my GED, did outstanding, on the GED. My problem was always not so much that I didn't know the material. I knew I tested well. I didn't have the ability to make myself sit and do homework.
Do you think you had ADD?
Oh, I definitely did. Looking back on it, the studies and everything that we have now, I've been diagnosed with it and everything. Took meds for it for a long time. I had to drop off those meds because of a heart condition. But so I still feel like I, have those issues. But I did really well on the GED, and then went to Vol State Community College in Gallatin, Tennessee, Harvard on the highway, and went there for a couple semesters. And it was there that I took broadcasting courses. I wanted to take something immediately that I liked,
right?
And so I took those courses, took some television production courses, and just I absolutely loved it. But, then at the time I was like, well, I didn't want to spend the full 4 years in high school. I really don't think I want to spend another 2 to 4 years in college. What am I going to do? And so I was like, I got to find something easier. So I talked to a recruiter about going to the military.
Well, there you have it, folks.
Yeah.
You see, I started the interview with dadgummit.
Yeah, it was. But the whole thing is a series of, up until, for the biggest part of my life, it was a matter of me being my own worst enemy. You know, everything that kept me down was a result of my own choices. But when you're that young,
were you just mad? Were you angry? Have you spent some time in therapy to unpack what was driving that?
Absolutely. One of the biggest, I guess, the past 2.5 years, I've actually been talking with a therapist, psychologist, psychiatrist.
Great.
And
yeah.
Man, it's absolutely amazing.
Isn't it amazing?
It is. Yeah. And it's like, there's a lot of stuff that I'm still unpacking. But, you know, seeing that, you know, of course, before this therapy, long before I realized that, you know, my issues were
right.
You know, all the obstacles were self-imposed.
Right.
And so
you go to the military.
Go to the military.
Marine.
You know, there was, at one point, it was like, you know, I definitely don't want to do school. And I talked to my dad about the military. He's like, I think that's a good idea. My whole family has been military based. My grandfather was in the Navy, World War II. My great uncle Charlie was I want to say like a rear admiral or something, you know, like that, but I can't remember. And it's like, I feel bad that I can't remember it. But anyway, served in World War II, Korea, and Vietnam on, you know, Navy ships. And my father was a hospital corpsman in the Navy.
Gotcha.
And the Marine Corps doesn't have, you know, medics. So they used the hospital corpsman from the Navy. Real tight relationship between hospital corpsmen and the Marines. We love our docs, you know. But anyway, that's what my father was in Vietnam, and he did a tour in Vietnam. I think got out in '68. But so in talking to my dad, he knew the military, you know, very well, and I talked to him, you know, a recruiter, Navy and Army, and they were like, "Great, we got you set up. We got a job for you. Any job you want, you can have it in the Army or the Navy." And then, you know, I thought, you know, as while I'm shopping this out, I should check out the Marine recruiter. And just to make a long story short, the Marine recruiter when I went in there said, "Yeah, we got jobs just like they do. But first, you need to decide whether or not you want to be a Marine. It doesn't matter what your job is. You're going to be a Marine first."
Wow.
And then they laid down that challenge. You know, it was in all of their recruiting commercials. You know, maybe you can be one of us. You know, it was like, man, that sounds like a challenge. You know, and plus I'd seen movies like Full Metal Jacket and stuff like that. I was like, yeah, there's a tough group of people. Do you think
part of that, the appeal of the Marine Corps, because it called you to step up, like you gotta be one of, as they say in the country, one of them ones.
Yes.
Right. After figuring out, I got some stuff I need to deal with, you needed to be somewhere where you could validate to yourself,
yes,
I'm not a screw up.
That's it. You know, it wasn't, you know, being a Marine is you know, you earn a title. You know, you're not just you know, in the Army, you're a soldier. In the Navy, you're a sailor. But in the Marine Corps, you're a Marine. And that, I knew that if I could graduate Marine Corps boot camp, it would make me feel validated in the fact that I didn't graduate high school.
Yeah.
Or that I didn't go to the point of getting my sheepskin, you know, in college.
Yeah.
I felt like at that point in my life, you know, if I could earn the title of United States Marine, I've made it. But it was, you know, there's a whole difference in becoming a Marine, earning that title, and then getting into the fleet.
Right.
You know, the fleet's a different story.
So what happens when you show up in the Marines? What was your Marine experience like?
So it was abbreviated.
Now, take us with you with Anything is Possible, the podcast. Stream new episodes weekly wherever you get your podcasts.
What happens when you show up in the Marines? What was your Marine experience like?
Yeah, it was abbreviated. At that point, I had you show up for a 4-year enlistment, and I had 3 years. In there, I'd gotten a knee injury while I was in there. I had a lot. I mean, I had was on a training exercise, getting ready to go on a deployment, and stepped in a hole and hyperextended my left knee about 90 degrees the wrong way. And so I felt devastated, at that point. I was facing physical therapy, the possibility of having surgery, and not to say anything bad about the Marine Corps, but the Marine Corps has no place or forgiveness for the weak.
Right.
So that became quickly an uphill battle. I knew what I was going to face, and then at that point, in my therapy sessions, they were talking about you need to come up to, you're either going to spend a lot of time in physical therapy, or you need to decide that maybe the Marine Corps is not for you at this time. So I started looking at my options of the therapy I had ahead of me based on, well, if I went ahead and went home, I could use my GI Bill, or so forth, to go ahead and go to school. And so that's what I did.
Would you end up going to school?
I went to
Where?
I went to UT.
Studying?
I studied at the time sport management, and I had a friend and roommate that was working at Neyland Stadium, and had talked to him. He's like, "Come over, we'll see if we can get you a job." I was trying to walk on and play football. Being a walk on, you can't have an outside, job. And so I was able to get a job at the University of Tennessee working in Neyland Stadium. And what I did day in and day out was pressure watch the bleachers of Neyland Stadium. Pressure watched everyone. At the time, they pulled up all of the metal or the aluminum, seating.
Yeah.
You pressure wash the entire concrete area and then later bolt them
Back down.
all back down. So that was a wild thing. But then I got to screwing up, once again. I don't know why I thought that if I had a problem with school in high school, why things would be different, in college. So my grades plummeted. At the time, Coach Fulmer was, the coach. I'd spoke with him, briefly at one point, and then I didn't bother to show back up, to walk on once my grades, went down. The thing is, you can change your zip code, but you can't change who you are.
Ooh, say that again. You
can change your zip code, but you can't change who you are. And I was still, up here, academically, I was still that kid that was screwing up in high school. Where there's, you get to college and there's even less, discipline for you,
right.
I mean, structure, And so I wound up working, part-time jobs, for a long time, going back and forth to college. And at one point, got a job working part-time at what used to be Cinetel Productions.
Yeah.
Here in town. Used to be over, was at the New Scripts, networks there in front of Dead Horse Lake. Started working part-time in the mailroom of Cinetel Productions, and then got asked at one point, hey, can you help us out? We record a show called Club Dance.
Club Dance.
And I was, can you work as a grip? And I was like, yeah, what's a grip, dude? And I started working, pulling cable, for a camera, operator. And then that progressed into me being asked to run camera a couple times. I'd had experience running camera way back when at Harvard on the highway, at Vol State. And so I could run a camera a little bit. And so I started doing that. And at that point, started working, there at Cinetail Productions full-time in the mailroom, and was asked to take on a job at WBIR, working in their production department, running camera. So for the longest time, I got a job working in production, which was kind of at one point my field of study. So I put off, college, for a long time. And I just from there, I kind of followed the money. I worked, at WBIR for a while. I left WBIR. It had become Cinetail and HGTV at that point. And they had started DIY, Food Network, and another network called Fine Living. Fine Living was kind of short-lived. But I left WBIR, years later to work for those 4 networks in network operations. And that job was stressful. I was, because you're responsible for
all of this different
for
stuff.
all of those network, and so it's a perfect product. There's no room for any mistakes. And I decided, this is not for me. I got to look for something else.
Let's take a break right here in
Sure.
your story, because part 2, I'm going to ask you to pull up your pants.
Uh-oh. Am I going to need these tissues over here?
That came out the wrong way. My guest is Eric Glasgow.